All the highlights from the third day's play in the second test between Sri Lanka and England. Today at the test is at 7:30 after the Channel 4 News with Jon Snow and Samira Ahmed.
Mandelson is cleared by the Hammond report. Nobody did wrong. Is it a complete whitewash?
His report establishes that I did not lie, I did not deceive, and I did not set out to mislead.
Good evening. The consummate insider, former Home Office lawyer Sir Anthony Hammond, has done his stuff. Cleared not only Mr. Mandelson, but everyone else. Passports for dome cash was the charge, but Hammond devotes 220 paragraphs to the Mandelson Home Office phone call, just 10 to the dome. Tonight, the catalogue of questions Hammond leaves unanswered. Why did Labour and Tory leaders campaign for so long to get the Hindujas' passports? Was it their cash? The worst crisis ever to hit Welsh tourism. Foot and mouth eats deep into the rural economy. And come clone with me, the Italian doctor, the DNA copy, and the 600 couples hoping it'll work on them.
And the other headlines tonight. Ethnic Albanian guerrillas in Kosovo have launched twin attacks against Yugoslav and Macedonian forces. Israel's new defense minister narrowly escapes a sniper's bullet. And not much of a gentleman's game as England take on Sri Lanka.
It cost a cabinet minister his political career, but now apparently no one is to blame. The long-awaited Hammond report into the Hinduja brothers' passport affair clears Peter Mandelson of doing anything wrong. Mr. Mandelson could barely contain his relief, although he insisted he had no desire to return to government. Sir Anthony Hammond concludes that the passport applications for both SP and GP Hinduja were handled properly and within established criteria, and that no improper pressure was brought to bear by any minister in respect of these applications, and there was no evidence of any improper relationship between either Peter Mandelson or Keith Vaz and the Hinduja brothers. In fact, the only criticism levelled is that record-keeping was unsatisfactory. But as our political correspondent Gary Gibbon reports, the report contains evidence of serious ministerial interest in securing passports for both brothers.
So it was all just a muddle. The Prime Minister sacked one of the most important ministers in the government in the middle of delicate talks on Northern Ireland. The Home Secretary and other cabinet ministers said Mr. Mandelson had gone because he lied. Mr. Mandelson himself said he had caused the Commons to be misled. But Sir Anthony Hammond says they were all wrong. Nobody lied. It was all a terrible mistake. Sir Anthony's report concludes, I do not believe that Mr. Mandelson has tried to deceive anyone throughout the course of these events.
Sir Anthony's report establishes that I did not lie, I did not deceive, and I did not set out to mislead. I am grateful to Sir Anthony for clearing my name and restoring my reputation. This was indeed a muddle rather than a misrepresentation, and I would like to say how much I regret the part I played in creating this muddle.
When Mr. Mandelson was summoned to Downing Street on the day of his resignation, in his words, number 10 turned into a kangaroo court. It's clear from the Hammond report that the Cabinet Secretary, Sir Richard Wilson, had told the Prime Minister that he should not get too involved in what was a slippery area. What seems to have turned the Prime Minister's mind was the advice of his Home Secretary. The report reveals that Jack Straw told Mr. Blair that he'd twice reminded Mr. Mandelson that he'd phoned the Immigration Minister, Mike O'Brien, and that he'd done so only days before Mr. Mandelson insisted that all contact had been through his private office. Mr. Straw told the Prime Minister it was possible that Srishant Hinduja's case had been prioritised because of the queries from Mr. O'Brien. On the fateful Wednesday morning, it was Jack Straw's version of events that seemed to weigh most heavily, with Alistair Campbell, the Prime Minister's chief press spokesman, the Lord Chancellor, Lord Irvine, and the final judge, the Prime Minister himself. He was told that Mr. Mandelson appeared to have changed his story yet again on the previous night's Channel 4 News.
You seem to be remembering an awful lot about a phone call which for 3 days you'd forgotten about.
There's no question of my forgetting about anything. Nobody has asked me before today.
Mr. Blair was visiting Inverness Royal Academy today. It's 6 weeks since he lost confidence in his friend and political soulmate and came to see Mr. Mandelson as a political liability. But today he was refusing to return to his reasons for sacking Mr. Mandelson and was celebrating the report's findings.
The reason I set up this inquiry, and you don't lightly as a Prime Minister do this, is because there was an allegation made that I regarded as so serious. Irrespective of the circumstances of Peter's resignation, that's a matter for me as Prime Minister at the time. But there was an allegation made that was tantamount, I thought, to one of corruption, namely that passports were given in exchange for the funding of a public project. And that allegation has been shown to be completely false.
But Sir Anthony Hammond takes a cursory look at links with the Hindujas' donation to the Dome. He did not interview the Hindujas, or their employees, nor staff at the Dome. In fact, the report's annex reveals that the only interviews he conducted on this specific area were with Keith Vaz, the Labour fundraiser Lord Levy, and Peter Mandelson. Sir Anthony sees no problem in principle with ministers making personal approaches to junior ministers in other departments about passport applications, even though 3 or 4 days after Mr. Mandelson's contact, a Home Office official emailed the Immigration Service asking, would Mr. Hinduja be likely to benefit from a positive approach to citizenship? One Conservative former immigration minister says in more than 2 years in the job, he never took a personal call from another minister about a passport application.
None whatsoever. It would be done through officials. It is not for one minister to talk to another minister about such a case without it being placed firmly in the hands of officials. No, it shouldn't be done. I'm surprised it was done.
Sir Anthony sees no significance in the extraordinary coincidence in dates, as the Hinduja money is confirmed for the Dome, and a passport application that had been refused 7 years earlier is granted in 6 months flat. And Sir Anthony sees nothing suspicious in Peter Mandelson's letter to the Dome boss, Jenny Page. It's written 5 months after Mr. Mandelson's call to the Home Office, and just after Mr. Mandelson has seen intelligence material about the bribery allegations against the Hindujas. Mr. Mandelson writes, if SP Hinduja wants to pursue his citizenship, he can do so without further involvement or commendation from me. The Minister for Europe, Keith Vaz, was today celebrating Sir Anthony Hammond's verdict that there was nothing improper in his relationship with the Hinduja family. Mr. Vaz never had to quit his office. But with Peter Mandelson, the Prime Minister felt he couldn't take the chance. The combination was too hot to handle. Passports for millionaires on corruption charges, a minister who'd already had to resign once for being less than straightforward, and weeks from a general election, Mr. Blair had to act not as a friend or a judge, but a politician.
Gary Gibbon. Mr. Mandelson didn't want to be interviewed about the inquiry, but his lawyer, Jonathan Kaplan QC, did come into our studio. When the former Northern Ireland Secretary resigned, he'd admitted being responsible for Parliament being given incorrect information. Does he still accept that now?
There was wrong information given, but I don't think at the end of the day, when you look at Sir Anthony Hammond's report, that one can say that it was Peter Mandelson's exclusive fault. He's accepted that he was party to a muddle, but beyond that, I think there was a lot of misinformation on the 23rd and 24th of January, which was not down to Peter Mandelson.
I mean, if we stripped out of this all the sort of things about prime ministerial powers and all the rest of it, I mean, under normal circumstances, he should still be in the job, should he?
Definitely. And I think, with hindsight, if they'd taken a different approach and had said, look, let's have an independent inquiry, let's see the results of that inquiry. If they're damning, he's got to go. Then we've had the inquiry, we've seen Sir Anthony Hammond's conclusions, and there's no question but that he would still be in the job today.
Well, despite Mr. Blair's praise for the inquiry's findings, not one of his ministers, including Mr. Straw and Mr. O'Brien, were available for interview. But I did speak to Dennis McShane, Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Foreign Secretary, and asked him, why did the apparently innocent Mr. Mandelson have to go?
The time, there was a lot of confusion, and I actually think Peter acted very honourably in resigning, and so the matter was dealt with very cleanly and quickly then. If you remember John Major hanging on to ministers and then them going, and some even ending up in prison, we've now got a report that exonerates Peter completely, but I think if we'd had 6 weeks of the kind of Westminster frenzy we've had today, that would have been bad for the government. I think both Peter and the Prime Minister were right at the time that he should go.
But it beggars a belief. Here's a man who was at the absolute pinnacle of negotiating a very complex peace deal in Northern Ireland, and for nothing, he is sacked.
I think history will judge that the events surrounding Peter's resignation were confused. I think Sir Anthony Hammond has shown that nobody acted wrongly or dishonourably. Peter's name now is restored, but I think at the time he would have been the first one to advise himself, Peter Mandelson that is, that he was right to go.
What you can't be pleased to hear about is the rest of the report, which is in the end a catalogue of ministerial intervention in the interests of getting the Hindujas a passport.
We also have William Hague and other prominent Conservatives and Liberal Democrats also backing the passport application for men who've given an immense amount of money to religious charities.
Well, hang on a minute,
in this
Mr. Hague
country.
isn't in power.
But I make applications or make representations on behalf of constituents of mine that want naturalisation or passports. And I think that Sir Anthony Hammond's report shows a very painstaking, meticulous civil service inquiry into the application.
Because we wanted to have the blessings not only of our families, but of Minister Farrakhan as well.
Lower key than the Million Man March, this gathering was backed by a wider range of black community leaders and showbiz personalities. For those at the rally, many said it was an opportunity to be positive about being black and to counter the negative stereotypes of African Americans. The organisers say it's now up to those attending to take that message back to their homes across America. Whatever the controversy surrounding Louis Farrakhan, and there's certainly plenty of it, people left this march saying they felt more positive about themselves and their communities than when they came. Rob Watson, BBC News, Washington.
The American elections race remains extremely close, with the latest polls showing the two principal candidates completely level. So the outcome is expected to be decided by a handful of swing states. One of them is Florida, the fourth largest state in the world, from where our correspondent Tom Carver now reports.
3 weeks left, but not much sign of election fever in the Sunshine State. Not long ago, the Republicans were looking good here. But according to the polls, the Gore campaign could deliver a dramatic upset.
I don't think necessarily the Gore campaign was expecting to be very competitive in the state. So now you see that it is competitive, that if Gore can wrap up this state, along with California and the Northeast, that puts him in a very, very good electoral position to just take the election overall.
This is like icing on the cake to have my brother here.
For the Bushes, winning Florida is a family matter. George W.'s younger brother, Jeb, is state governor, and losing here could doom both their careers. But this is a very unpredictable race. Take Jim Nagel, a Democrat mayor, who intends to vote for Bush.
In Florida, we have a majority of voters that are registered as Democrats, but in spite of that, Jeb Bush was elected as governor. So I think many times people are willing